Right. Welcome to another World podcast with myself, founder and editor of World, and Professor Brian Birdnow, uh, journalist, author, and lecturer at Harris Stowe University. And we're going to be discussing how and why Donald Trump and the Republican Party comfortably won the 2024 US presidential election, making him only the second president in American history that has managed to win non-consecutive terms in office. So we're going to be getting into that. Um, the main points we're going to be covering are the political and economic cyclical forces involved, um, Biden's increasing unelectability after 2020, the state of the US economy, um, bipartisan support for Trump, how the third party support from people like uh, RFK, Kennedy became had a significant impact. Elon Musk's obvious influence as well and effect, and obviously the flawed and way in which Kamala Harris was selected disastrously, I think, as the nominee. So we'll be getting into that. But first of all, I think it's important to put this election result into its proper historical context, because I've noticed quite a number of pundits and journalists and various people out there are calling this election result a landslide, which it is not, because if you look back, this is either because they're too young or because they don't have any historical knowledge. But if you want to know what a landslide in a US presidential terms looks like, you just need to go back to the 1980s, and it was a totally different landscape. As from what I can determine, the last president really to be in landslide territory, from what I can see, you need to be winning it. I mean, first of all, as we know, to win a US presidential election, the winning candidate has to win a minimum of 270 electoral college votes out of the available 538. And to be in landslide territory, in my opinion, they need to be winning at least 400 electoral votes. So the last president to achieve that was H.W. Bush in 1988 when he defeated Michael Dukakis. And then prior to that, though, the real landslides, much more sizable than that, were won by Ronald Reagan against Jimmy Carter in 1980, and then again when he won re-election in 84, he won well over 500 electoral college votes. So that this is not this is Trump won this by 312 electoral college votes, which is perfectly respectable and it's comfortable, but it's only six more than he won in 2016. And it's not even anywhere near as much that Obama won in both 2008 and 2012 when he won 365 and 332, and even Bill Clinton in 92 and 96 won by 370 and 379. So and then obviously, as I say, going back to the 80s, that's when the last time there was real proper, I would say, landslides, because you had I've got the figures here. So we've got, let's see. Yeah, so in 88, H.W. Bush secured 426 electoral votes, carrying 40 states against, as I say, Michael Dukakis. But then obviously this pales in comparison to what Ronald Reagan managed in 1980 when he secured a colossal 489 electoral votes against Jimmy Carter, carrying 44 states. But again, that was again dwarfed by what he achieved in 84 on re-election and winning by 525 votes, carrying 49 states, where challenger Walter Mondale only, apart from winning Washington, D.C., only secured his home state of Minnesota, which obviously not being particularly remarkable given that it was his home state. But that's those sort of results are totally alien, really, to what people are now used to. So that's just to explain that it was a comfortable victory, but not a not a landslide. Those are the sort of numbers you have to get to be in landslide territory. But it was nonetheless a very impressive result based on the expectations, really, and how it was framed leading up, in my opinion, because it was all projected to be a tight race. All the polls, a lot of the polling showed it was going to be tight. I can get into why that is later on. But before we move on to any other more points, is there anything you want to add to that, Brian? I mean, do you concur with that? Is there anything you want to sort of?
Yeah, I would say that, well, 400 electoral votes undoubtedly is a landslide. I would say that even, like, say, if you're getting into the 360 range or whatever, yeah,
Mm,
you're on the verge of a landslide right there. But yeah, to call this a landslide, as some people have been doing, is certainly not the case. But again, as you say, since it was expected that this was going to be a very tight kind of a nail biter, and that
mm,
people would be up very late at night waiting for the results and that kind of thing. That didn't happen. And
mm,
I guess what will unfold here is why that didn't happen, and of course the limitations of Kamala Harris. And I know a lot of Democrats who are saying now that they should have won this thing, and that if they had had a competent candidate, that they would have won it. But I
mm,
think that what you were saying was the fact is that country has not really, Biden actually won the presidency last time, and I don't think that very many people of either party were actually excited about a Biden presidency. Most of the Democrats that I know jumped on the Biden bandwagon because they thought that he was the only guy who could actually beat Trump, but they didn't
mm,
have any expectations that when he did win, that he was going to kind of do anything
mm.
particularly noteworthy, or that he was actually, they all, in their heart of hearts, knew that he was not, really fit,
Yeah.
physically fit to be the president.
I think in 2020, before COVID came along, they were sort of, deep down, they were sort of resigned to possibly 8 years of Trump and were just putting him in as a last throw of the dice, of safe old white man, um, uh, as a caretaker possibly,
Yeah.
candidate. And I don't think any serious candidates were standing because weren't going to bother until 2024. And then COVID came along, and that upended the economy and turned everything around. And I think I'll say one of the points I make in my article on this is that I regard Biden as a COVID president, because it totally upended everything, and it interrupted the political cycle. Um, and the political cycle is much more, I think, much more rigidly integral to the US than other countries because of your term limit. Because you've got I think it's the 22nd Amendment, introduced by Harry Truman, in I think 1947, and ratified by Congress in 51, after they'd had 3 terms of
Roosevelt.
Roosevelt, of, uh, of H.D. Roosevelt, and he had died in office, and I think that was a sort of a cue to try and prevent that happening again, and therefore, because incumbency is a big advantage, in US presidential electoral history, when you've got the sitting president running, it improves the chances of winning re-election. Um, so that's something that prevents it happening on more than one occasion. But of course, in this instance, Biden wasn't able to do that because of his decline. The decline after 2020 was absolutely starking,
Well,
remarkable.
right. And, during the 2020 election, Biden's camp used COVID as a dodge and a way to keep him in his, scripting his appearances and everything.
Mm.
And he wasn't actually out there shaking hands and that kind of thing because of COVID, but that was what they wanted because they didn't really want people to see how badly Biden was performing and stumbling and I mean getting every mangling all this syntax and stuff. So they actually had him reading scripts
Mm.
and went very well. And of course, they said, well, we can't get out and campaign due to the COVID restrictions, and therefore that's why he'll stay in his garage and everything. But
His
I
bunker or
think,
something.
yeah, most people realized that this was, again, this was their dodge, and
Mm.
but it worked. I mean, they won the election in 2020. It was close, but they did win.
Mm.
And but again, it's like I was saying a moment ago that I don't think even the Democrats really expected much from Biden. But of course, as long as you win, if you're a party person, as long as you win, that's the important thing. It doesn't really matter whether you stand for anything, or it doesn't matter really what you have, in store for the country, as long as you get your people in there. And that's, they thought that Biden had a pretty good chance of defeating Trump.
Mm.
Whereas, Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others had no chance, so
Mm.
they just basically jumped on the bandwagon
I
and he won.
do think I do often wonder though whether Bernie Sanders would electorally would do a lot better against Trump because he's the sort of the left's equivalent, the populist left's equivalent to Trump in some ways. Whether he galvanize more
Mm-hmm.
of an enthusiastic core base than other Democrats in that
That would
sense.
be an interesting thing to see, but Bernie Sanders has white liberals have always liked him, but
Mm.
he's not a formal member of the Democratic Party. He's a member of the American Socialist Party.
Mm.
But as far as in the Senate, you have to be associated with one of the parties, and so he actually votes with and he, kind of he's counted among the Democrats, even though he's not really a Democrat. And I don't see the American public is, I don't think, going to vote for somebody who actually literally honeymooned in Moscow and claimed, as late as about 1990 that he was a communist. And the American
Right.
public's like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not gonna, they're not going to vote for that.
Mm.
He's kind of run away from that recently, but
Mm.
there's all kinds of footage of him addressing the kind of Democratic Socialists of America and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And while most Americans do not, we have no inordinate fear of communism or anything, but a lot of Americans say, hey, wait a minute, we don't like that.
Mm.
And anybody who's talking about going ahead and imposing 70% income taxes or whatever, that's just gonna, that's gonna blow your candidacy
Well,
up.
is that
So,
supposed to be on the rich though, isn't it? All the mega rich.
well,
This is
that's
why I wonder he's got this sort of. There's one thing he has in common with Trump. He's got this sort of anti-establishment kind of uh flavor to his message in terms of the mega the mega rich and how they're squandering the because obviously there is a problem the in terms of the he accurately I think describes the problem of mega wealth going to this top I think they're now called center billionaires that have they've got the wealth of small countries basically
yeah.
and that's sucking it and making the wealth out of the average American, which is there's a lot of truth in that, and I think that would probably resonate with a lot of people.
Well, I think it does. That's it's always been an interesting kind of a feature of American politics that we Americans, again, the success story, somebody who came from nothing and worked
Mm.
hard and got to the top and everything. But beyond with all that though, there is this kind of it's a bias of sorts where we don't necessarily, we claim, I should say, to not like the people who actually were born with, as they would say, with the silver spoon in your mouth.
Mm.
But we never really, because when you look at the Roosevelts, you look at the Kennedys, you look at the Tafts and the other important political families,
Dynasties, you mean?
yeah, they were right.
Mm,
Those guys were
mm.
all, people who like they inherited wealth, and they never did. It wasn't like they did badly at the polls, Now,
No.
on the other hand, so going back in the historical analysis here, back in the
Just
19th
quickly
century.
on that point, though, wouldn't that also apply to the Bushes?
Well, yeah. The
Yeah.
Bushes were, Bush's George H.W. Bush's father was a senator and that kind of thing.
Mm,
Now he did not stay in the East in Connecticut. He moved down to Texas and everything.
right.
But yeah, it's always a thing where, going way back into the 19th century, you had the populist movement, as they called themselves in America. And these guys, there not a lot of economic things that they didn't quite understand. There was a movement of the farmers for the most part, and the farmers were actually going out into the West. They were taking land that, may have been well, it was Indian land, of course, but they're getting their farms going, and it's an incredibly hard life, but they were very productive. They couldn't understand that they were producing more and more and more, and
Mm,
this was driving agricultural prices down, but they all began to think that there is a of the rich guys and the bankers and the railroads and stuff, basically targeting them. They didn't like that, and they had their candidates. There's a fellow named Jerry Simpson who called himself. Well, he ended up being called Sockless Jerry Simpson because he went to a political debate. And he pointed out that my opponent here is wearing a Prince Albert coat and a top hat, and
mm,
he said, I, on the other hand, am not wearing socks. And he pulled up his pant leg to show that he was wearing boots without socks.
right.
And I think that everybody in the crowd would have been perfectly happy to buy him a dozen pairs of socks if he needed it.
Mm,
But again, to play this game that my opponent is a rich, kind of a pampered, uh, wealthy individual. I am not. I work for everything I got and all that kind of thing.
mm,
That always plays well in America, even if it's not necessarily true.
yeah.
So,
It's the
mhm.
sentiment, I suppose.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's as I say, I think much of this is, as I say, much of as I say is also governed is determined by the cyclical nature of America and the economic and political cycles. But as I was saying, yeah, let's say the cycle. I think obviously it's a bad time for incumbents around the world right now. Really, whoever's in office is for it, as we was demonstrated in the UK earlier last year. Um, but much as so much is also the where we are economically globally, and I mean, as I think I've might have said before, it's I've read. If you, I don't know if, as I say, I don't think you read it, but the uh, the historian and geopolitical forecaster George Freeman writes very interesting books where he talks about the cyclical nature of America. Um, about how every 50 years America goes through its economic cycles, and then every 80 years through institutional cycles. And he explains this is the first time in history where both cycles have reached maturity at the same time. So after, just to sort of summarize it, so when he talks about institutional cycles, he's referring to the first would have been from the revolution uh, to around to the Civil War. So that was obviously establishing the United States.
yeah.
Then from the Civil War, you had the issue of states' rights. I mean, slavery was obviously was a main thing as well, but the institutional issue was states' rights versus federalism, and the Civil War established the validity of or
Primacy.
necessity of federalization. And then the next one, I think he says after that you had the next 80 years, and you got to World War II. So then you have, and then that was the introduction of the expertise and the specialization of the economy to fight World War II. And he says we've now got to the end of that, You now got to the end of that, and then the economic cycles briefly. He talks about those and how there's always needs to be something uh, turbocharging the economy and driving it. So there's some innovation. So I think he said, I think that once you had, I think it was the telegraph, I think, or something like that, in the 19th century. But then more into the 20th century, you have the internal combustion engine
Automobile, right?
from Roosevelt's time, and that became a turbocharging factor. And then from the 80s, you had the microchip. And then each time there has to be a transformational president that upends everything and changes things around. He said that you can have them from either party. I mean, he says it was Roosevelt in the Second World War, who obviously had to put the US onto a war economy and move everything along, and that started that process. And then obviously um, Eisenhower bringing in taking inspiration from the autobahns in Germany in World War II and introducing the interstate highway system and all that. And then Reagan, obviously, you had Reaganomics in the 80s, changing the tax code and the introduction of the microchip. And so now we got to the stage where there's something else. I think probably the next one will probably be artificial intelligence, but
Likely, yeah.
I suspect that'll be the next driver. Um, but yeah, so I don't know what your position would be on that.
Well, I think that you like in the bigger picture with all that, that most people don't tend not to think in those terms,
No, but it
But
influences them without them
right,
realizing it. That's what I'm
yeah,
saying. And that
yeah,
drives,
certainly.
yeah, that
Right, you're being
drives,
driven by
yeah.
these things without necessarily kind of being an active participant, but it is
Mm,
happening to everybody. And yeah, I'd say really that like I mean, there's all kinds of very interesting things with all that because like again the telegraph and the railroads and stuff in the 19th century,
mm,
then leading into the automobile in the early 20th century. And really, Americans have loved cars ever since the very beginning, And
mm,
I mean, I don't know, like, how they tend to teach this over in Europe, but many Americans, in fact, most of them, actually do think that Henry Ford invented the automobile. And I have to tell people in my classes that that's not true. The
mm,
automobile actually was a German thing, and people are
mm,
like, "Wow," and I say the Germans actually invented it. They were the first, and the Germans and French were the first guys doing it. And I said, here in the 1890s, though, you had the shade tree mechanics and stuff, the guys who were working in livery stables and things like that. But they also knew a little bit about, small engines. And they said, well, you can put
mm,
one of these engines on a buggy and actually make it go, And we were, Americans were from the very start were completely bowled over by these things, And I know here in St. Louis, which was the fourth largest city in America in 1900, there were only, I want to say, less than 150 automobiles registered, at that time.
mm,
So, that's 20th century already underway, but very few people having cars. By 1910, cars were everywhere. And again, Americans wanted them. And we always, well, we created a society that was, based largely on the automobile. That's why, you
mm,
got people in America. It's a common thing, where you live someplace and you work, 40 miles away, but you can go there every day and then come home because you have an automobile,
mm,
And that's one of the things that the American left. Whereas at one time, the fact that the American workers had cars and things like that, and we're kind of proud of that. We were saying, okay, well, our working class actually drives, whereas the Europeans, ride bicycles, the Chinese and the Africans walk and stuff. But the
mm,
American left for a long time has said that that is a terrible thing, and that they don't really say outright that if you vote me in there, we're going to take your car away. That's not going to go. Yeah, that's not going to go. But
Mm,
that is kind of what a lot of the left would like to have. And they kind of dress that up by saying that, well, what we would like is a return to a walkable world where you walk, you have they call it the new urbanism, essentially, where again you're not looking at these kind of endless sort of suburbs with houses all looking the same or whatever.
mm,
They talk about kind of bringing again neighborhoods and stuff back, which would not be a bad thing, but a
mm.
lot of it is the idea that the American working class lives too well, and we need to go ahead and not to clamp down on it, but we don't want people driving 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles to their jobs anymore. We want to go ahead and kind of contain all that, and that's why, well,
Well, that's oh, they're now
like,
using net zero, aren't they? And the eco um,
yeah, pretty
issue to try
much.
and drive that. But I mean, this is tying into what I'm saying is that winning candidates like Reagan and like Trump, they know how to tap into it.
Yeah.
They can tap into the center of what people really want, what the major the hot issues are, and go with it. I don't know necessarily that Trump's going to be the transformational president, but Reagan certainly was. But either way, that's why I think certainly Trump's brand of MAGA republicanism is in tune with the broader global economic cycle, because we're at a point where you're getting this decentralization of the global economy and unwinding of what was sort of kick-started 40 years ago. And you're getting this need to reshore manufacturing now that places like China have no longer got the edge on manufacturing, and they can't produce the goods any longer, the cheap goods that to feed to keep the whole thing going, and that's feeding into this the appeal to middle America, to blue collar workers and all the rest of it, to reshore manufacturing, which I think partly is achievable through technology, through hence going back to what I'm saying about new innovations like 3D printing and artificial intelligence, which will eliminate the problem of which may help to address the problem of cost of reshoring, which is obviously because the problem you've got with reshoring is inflation. That was the reason in the 80s that it was outsourced and sent abroad, is because
Yeah.
you had such inflation. And so that's the trade-off you've always got. So that's, I think, yeah, that's where we are with uh on that. That's the other sort of the factor I wanted to add, really. But yes, yeah, but say, do you have a sort of another take on that, or?
Well, yeah, I would say that, again, part of the possibility, yeah, again, it's a possibility, it's not a certainty.
Mm,
But Trump does say that he intends to, bring manufacturing back, and there has actually been some of that going on, for a while now. But again, the like when he was talking about in his first term, he was talking about going ahead and getting American steel, kind of back up on its feet again. But and then for a little while there seemed to be like a chance that that was actually going to happen. But again, steel as an industry is labor intensive.
mm,
And you've got, I mean, there's no, well, at least as far as I'm aware, there's no way that you're going to be able to produce steel without a very large labor force and without guys who, we will not be paying people less than, they're going to be paying guys to do it in South Korea or Brazil or whatever. So you're going to have that real problem there. Now, if they can address some of this through AI and through, kind of automation, well, then it's a possibility. But again,
mm,
the labor intensive industries are going to be, it's just going to be that much more problematic there. I got a brother who, my brother's retired now, but he was an auto worker,
right.
and yeah, I mean, he did very well, and but he did say too that, you know, ultimately there's going to have to be some sort of major restructuring because they're not going to be, they'll be able to do a lot more with fewer people. And of
Mm,
course, if you're an auto worker, you don't want to hear that because you might be one of the fewer people, you know? So there is going to be, I think, bringing back, to bring it back home, as it were, American industries and stuff, but it's not going to be what it once was,
no.
again, you look at all the companies that are out there that are doing well, but most of the ones that are doing well are doing better now because their labor force is much smaller than it once was. And of course, when you get a smaller labor force, you don't have to pay as much, and all that leads to bottom line considerations. Now,
Mm,
where does that leave, you know, where does that enter into the political realm and so forth? That's to be, that means to be seen. And you said a moment ago, and I think you were right, that Trump is probably not going to be a transformational president, and that is due to the fact that he'll be sworn in 2 weeks, and
mm,
those 4 years are going to go in the blink of an eye.
yeah.
And if history is any guide, the party that is in power, a guy wins the presidency, and his party usually takes a pretty good beating in the midterm elections.
Mm.
Now, yeah, there's a very good chance, I'd say probably even a likelihood, that the Democrats they'll take control of the House of Representatives.
Because the Republicans only won that by a whisker, didn't they? They didn't it didn't have a
Yeah,
not a very large majority in there, have they?
they actually, yeah, the Republicans actually lost one seat in the House,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that was one of these kind of things where, this happens almost every election, there are many precincts and districts reporting late and so forth,
Mm,
and somebody who thinks that they won is told the next day or 2 days later, oh, by the way, you actually didn't win, you lost, and all these extra votes came in, but it was looking well. The Republicans did win. They won. They got they won 4 or 5 seats there, and they won
mm,
control of the House. They had the House of Representatives by a very narrow margin. I think they were up by 4 seats, but
mm,
they ended up losing one of those seats when when all the votes were counted. So they still hold the House, but very narrowly. And again, since the party in power almost always loses the midterm election, when you got three guys, you get an edge of three, there's no margin for error. One of the things that was kind of humorous
yeah.
is that Trump was talking about taking people from the House and bringing them into his administration.
Mm,
And he was told, you don't want to do that because
yeah.
that's going to mean there will be, you're going to have 3 special elections and you could possibly end up fumbling and losing
Mm,
the House of Representatives. He was like, oh boy, we can't do that. So anyway, that all of that kind of mitigates against Trump being a transformational guy.
mm,
Had he had 8 years, consecutive years, it might have happened, but
yeah.
I don't see anything. These first two, and Trump says that he's got a whole bunch of executive orders he's going to issue on the first day. And, executive orders basically circumvent Congress. You simply sign
Mm,
this and it becomes a law. Now, the Congress can theoretically they can go into session and then they can basically repeal the executive
yeah.
orders. But with Congress being held by the Republicans, they're probably going to give Trump some kind of leeway here. And that was one of the things that happened. Well, the first thing that that Biden did when he won 4 years ago was he signed an order killing what was called, I don't know if you guys knew about that, but it's called the Keystone Pipeline.
So you're talking
It
about
was,
Biden here.
yeah, Biden,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
He
that's one of the points I actually make. Well, are you talking you're talking about Nord Stream, sorry, did you say?
well, yeah, that it was
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, because
It
one
was,
of the points I make is that sort of ties into another points I make about Biden's missteps
yeah,
and policy mistakes over his 4 years, which is one of them was lifting the sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which I think possibly helped to embolden Vladimir Putin. Uh, and
Yeah,
also then going domestically, he didn't he you'll know more of this than I do, but did something to take the frustrate domestic oil drilling because
right.
Trump had pretty much made America energy independent, hadn't he? And
Yep, yep.
Biden sort of undid all that, as well as obviously halting work on the southern border. And then, of course, I think what Biden's major misstep obviously was his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which is obviously long overdue, but obviously disastrously carried out. So I think even a child would know not to pull your troops out before anyone else has left.
Yeah,
The
and
pretty dumb thing to
not
do,
to
really.
leave a $10 billion air base,
Mm.
completely just
And,
leaving it there.
and
I
leaving
mean,
$7 billion worth of equipment and ammunition behind for the Taliban as well to inherit.
yeah, that was see that was something that the media in America never talked about that very much because
Mm,
it was a disaster.
mm,
And when people got wind of that, a lot of people, myself included, we were just completely, kind of open mouthed about
mm,
how bad this whole thing was. But again, the much of the American, the big media here did not want to cover that because it was so bad, and
mm,
it made Biden look as bad as he was, and
mm.
they didn't talk much about that. But when you're talking about the domestic oil drilling and all that, yeah, there was something. The Keystone pipeline was separate from Nord Stream. It was
Oh, sorry, you're
a
talking about Keystone. Sorry, I thought you were talking about yeah,
Keystone,
because Nord
right?
Stream was. I'm talking about Europe. You're talking about the
Yeah, I'm talking
US,
about
aren't you? Sorry.
U.S. and
Yeah.
Canada, and Keystone, the Keystone pipeline that had been they had been working on that now for like heck, I think about 15 years or
Mm,
whatever. There were many, many, kind of tens of billions of dollars that had already been put into that, and that was going to be taking Canadian oil and simply bringing it down here for refining, and then it
mm,
would be, they're going to be able to kind of, you can eliminate the middleman. So it was going to be it was a big, big project. And up there in the like North Dakota and so forth, the oil fields up there, they were going to be benefiting from this. And there were, that was North Dakota, which is a very, very cold and inhospitable. Well, it's beautiful scenery, I would say, but it's a cold, inhospitable place to live. But with all the oil drilling that was going on up there, you had oil guys who were making $90 an hour, laborers, and
mm,
all kinds of people were going up there. And now that's, Biden killed his first act in office was he killed the Keystone Pipeline. He
mm.
simply signed an executive order saying this is now, it's over with. And
Yes.
I didn't see how, an American president can simply on his own void valid contracts that had been issued and stuff. The guys
Mm,
who invested in that, they got really burned on it badly. And, Trump said that if he win, he said before the election, he said, well, if I win again, then we will restart the Keystone Pipeline. But the guys who had been involved with it said, nah, we're out because we cannot, you may only be there for 4 years, and the next guy who comes in will kill the thing again, and we can't afford literally to put, a whole lot more money into a project that the other side might kill in 4 years.
mm.
So and
And then,
that was, again,
of course, Harris kept flip flopping on fracking, didn't she? And wouldn't
yeah,
commit to fracking, and that was another. They could see where the lines were being drawn on that. She wasn't going to honor fracking in the crucial swing states. So isn't it obviously Pennsylvania is being the biggest? Isn't it quite a hot topic in Pennsylvania? Isn't it?
yeah,
And
that's well,
that's worth 19 electoral college votes. So and she wasn't.
yeah,
She
she
shot herself
well,
in the foot there.
yeah, she had been. They had footage of her saying that if I am elected, that's the first thing we're going to stop.
Mm,
And then they were asking her, in Pennsylvania and other places, and they were saying what you were saying before is that We were energy independent under Trump. We were once again the world's largest oil and natural gas producer. And Biden came in and basically, turned off the spigot. And we had to go hand in hand to OPEC, asking them to go ahead, please increase oil production. They kind of laughed in our
Mm.
faces. They said, you Americans had been increasing production and you were basically smoking us. Now we've suddenly become quite important to you. And that's one of the things Trump has said too. He said this after he won. He said, I pledge that I will reduce the price of gasoline by 50%.
Mm.
And when it got up to $5 a gallon, a couple of years ago, that's when Biden started really to worry about it, because $5 a gallon gas. I mean, you all pay much more than that in Europe,
Yeah.
but that over here, $5 a gallon is just like, it's stratospheric,
Mm. It's actually
and
gone down here now. It's not too bad at the moment in the UK. It's averaging around the, obviously we're in, it's on in pence here, but it's at the moment it's in the sort of low 130s. So it depends where you go. The supermarkets are cheaper than independents because they've got the bargaining power to keep it down. But yeah, you can buy petrol here for about, at the moment, in the low, about 132 pence a liter at the moment. It's not crazy like it has been, but it depends where in the country you are, of course, because you go way out into the country. Where I live is not too far from major motorways and lines and transportation links, so it's not too bad here. But you go way out into the sticks, it gets expensive again because of the transportation costs. But what you've just said actually ties in very well with the general point about the economy, really, I think, being the biggest factor in this election, given that according to polling, 81% of Americans cited the economy and inflation as their primary concern. Um, and 69% of people, Trump voters, put the economy down as their primary factor. And another misstep of Biden's, which ties into this, is his stimulus package early on in his administration, where he was warned by various economists that it would stoke inflation if he signed it into law. And according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, it apparently contributed. They estimate it contributed half to the inflationary pressure that peaked at around 9% in the June of 2022. So that all fed into this as well. So certainly, I would go along with what you're saying, 100%.
Well, when you dump $7 trillion into the economy without a corresponding increase in the production of goods and services by the economy, then
Mm,
obviously inflation is what's going to happen. And that's just, that is economics, lesson number one,
mm,
that you don't go ahead and simply, be printing money unless the
yeah.
economy is producing,
I mean,
that's going to
the same
inflation.
happened in the UK on COVID, because our economy was shut down, to save businesses and jobs, people were put on furlough. And so basically, the government subsidized businesses to keep paying the workers that couldn't work. And
Yeah.
so you had both the dual force of what you just said. So you had both the subsidies and the ceasing in production. And then shortly after, of course, when everything opened up again, of course, you had the supply chain shocks as well around the world. Add Ukraine war to that. Our inflation peaked higher than yours. It peaked at around 11%, I think, at one point before. Now it's back under control now, thanks to the previous outgoing Conservative government. Managed to get it back down to around its target, its 2% target. But yeah, that's just tying into what, yeah, that just reinforces exactly what you're saying. That's what history shows. Yeah.
Well, in here, too. You know, there have been, well, after COVID, like everything you said, you know, after COVID, and you had supply chain disruptions, and you had the normal like reconversion, as it were. But
Mm,
Biden never, you know, never acknowledged any of this. And
mm,
you know, the country, when you got hard times, you know, of course, the president is not going to harp on that because it doesn't make them look good, you know. But they want, you know, like reassurance, and that was where Bill Clinton, you know, was an expert because he's up there saying, "I feel your pain" and all this kind of thing, you know. And I mean, just sort of saying that, okay, yeah, things aren't great, and I understand that, and we're going to. But Biden basically refused even to anything of that sort. You know,
right.
he was saying, you know, whistle a happy tune, and everything is going along just fine. And he was becoming increasingly divorced from reality. You know, he said, I guess it was last the summer or probably this last spring, he actually said that there was no problem on the southern border. There's no border crisis at all. And people were even, you know,
Mm.
even Saturday Night Live, the program that's on Saturday nights here, you know,
I've seen clips
uh,
of that on YouTube. Yeah, it's quite funny. Yeah.
yeah, they were doing had a guy, you know, on there who impersonates Biden,
Mm,
and he is saying that they have him there saying there is no border, there is no crisis on the southern border. Then
mm,
they cut to clips of people swimming the Rio Grande, or you know, hundreds of people walking right into the country, and there's
mm,
Biden. There is no problem on the southern border, you know. And the whole thing with that, you know, I don't know how that has been reported over, you know, on your side of the pond, but
mm,
that's, you know, the Democrats have wanted that for a long, long time
mm.
because they figure that all these guys, you know, coming in
We'll vote for
will
them.
eventually, yeah, they're
Yeah.
gonna become voters and they'll all vote
I'll
Democratic.
show later why that's not the case, but carry on.
Okay, well, that was
Yeah.
what, you know, a lot of, you know, and again, that would be like with Trump doing much better among
Mm,
Hispanics and actually
exactly.
winning the
Mm,
Hispanic male vote, you know, a lot of the Democrats are like, my God, we never thought this was going to happen. But, you know, and every time you do have some kind of a crime committed, you know, by an illegal immigrant. And, you know, the business down in New Orleans yesterday, that guy was you know, he was wearing, he had an Islamic, you know, kind of flag on the back of his truck and everything. And they were treating it, they said, this is a terrorist incident, and we do not believe this man acted alone, you know.
mm,
And they don't, you know, they're not hyping this. You know, this is not like they're trying to go ahead and capitalize on it. This is, you know, investigators for the Louisiana State Police and the federal people, and they said that this is a terrorist incident and that this man did not act alone.
mm,
Every time something like that happens, then of course, well, you know, I don't want to say everybody goes into panic mode, but this is something that, you know, Trump and the Republicans have been warning about for a long time. I think overhyping it a little bit, you know, saying that all the immigrants who come here are the illegals and they're all potential criminals and stuff, which they aren't. But, you know, I mean, I don't know what about this that they don't understand. You know, people are in the country illegally and you know, they're not
mm,
supposed to be here. They've violated the laws and we don't even bother to
mm.
try to enforce them.
We've got the same issue here with boats coming over the channel. It's neither Conservative or Labour have done anything to appear willing or able to do anything to address it because they won't unless you have firm consequences and deterrents. It'll just carry on, and there's
Yeah.
they come over in the tens of thousands every month or every week. Uh, I can't remember. I haven't got the exact figures in front of me, but it's quite eye-watering. What happens? They go through Europe, um, and they go through France and what have you, and they haven't got much incentives to stop them because they'll go on and come here. There were some measures, I think. Well, I think it dipped here briefly for a while, and they went on to Ireland, but this is, I think, one of the reasons why you're going to see disaffection over the next few, already in the major parties in the UK. And there's an argument that we're sort of one election cycle behind the US. And we're sort of heading to this era where I don't know if you're familiar with Nigel Farage, but he's the sort of he's a big pal of Trump, but he's the he was one of the leaders of Brexit for the UK independent, the sort of resurgent um, anti-establishment. It's a bit similar to the Tea Party in America.
Mhm.
So it was the UK Independence Party that fought for Brexit, and then it then became the Brexit Party when Theresa May was Prime Minister to get it back on the agenda and to make sure it got done. And now it's been changed again to Reform UK, and it's surging in support. It won a handful of seats in the last election when Labour just inherited the Conservative implosion, and now some measures showing its membership is overtaking the Conservative Party, and it's trying to replace the Conservative Party as the centre right party. Because 100 years, it's similar to what happened 100 years ago in the UK. There was a realignment on the left. So what happened? You had in the 19th century, you had the old Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, and that went on into the early 20th century. And then shortly after the First World War, the
Labor.
Labour Party, that it was called the Labour and Workers' Party, it replaced the Liberals. It became the new party of the left, and the Liberals died out. I think we're possibly seeing something similar now on the right. So you're getting a new right party. But back just to what you were saying about Biden being apparently oblivious to the situation, it reminds me of something very similar that occurred just before Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979. Because towards the end of the 70s, there was what was called the Winter of Discontent, where there were mass strikes, rampant inflation, rubbish left out in the streets and everything. And the Labour Prime Minister at the time was James Callaghan, and he was asked, please comment on the crisis. What are you going to do about this crisis? And his response was, "What crisis?" So that's that just reminded me of that what you said there. But yeah, yes, I think Biden. I just agree. Biden signed that stimulus into effect at the worst possible um, time. But you also mentioned, I think, another valid point is how the mainstream media avoids all of this and tries to sidestep a lot
Yeah.
of this stuff, which leads on to another point about the democratization and decentralization of media, which is sort of negated that and got around it. Because obviously Trump has been able to, both in 2016 and especially now, and the Republicans have been able to get around that by appealing to independent broadcasters and influencers that have absolute phenomenal reach. Amongst tens of millions, like Joe Rogan, for example, they get watched
Yeah.
by tens of millions of Americans. And this is another thing that Harris wouldn't do, which we'll go on to about Harris later. But Harris she wouldn't do any of that stuff. But that all played into. So that sort of this is why it doesn't matter so much now, because they haven't got that monopoly that they once had, even 20 years ago.
Well, that's true. Here, the big beginnings of all that, well, it goes way back, but that was when you started having these radio people, not TV guys, but radio people who commanded huge, listening audiences. A fellow guy died a couple of years ago. His name was Rush Limbaugh. And he had, he was just a talk radio guy out in California, but everybody in the country started listening to him,
Mm.
and he had during the 90s, I guess he actually got going in the early 90s and he was continuing up until he died back in 2021. But he had at, various times, he would have as many as 60 million people listening to him, and he
60, you
was
say?
about 60 million.
Right, cry.
That's what the numbers that they gave, and I was thinking, I
Mm.
don't know, that's an awful lot
That's
of
a
people.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he did though, and see the thing that he used to do, when he got started, he wasn't thinking of himself as a deep thinker and an intellectual or whatever. He just used to love. He knew the business, and he had actually been. Well, he had been working in pro sports and things like that, but he just wanted to have fun with it. And he used to, really kind of trash the left, tear him up one side and down the other. He had like he said, okay, well, the stupidest thing that a liberal has said this week. he puts these things on there,
Mm.
and he had all kinds of parodies and all kinds of songs and all kinds of stuff. And he really had a lot of fun with it. And people who, I don't know, people who didn't like him, even they admitted that in person he could be a very charming individual. And again,
Mm.
since everybody was listening to him, he made no secret about it. He was a Republican, yeah, but he didn't spare the Republicans when Republicans were doing stupid things or they were
Mm.
saying stupid things or whatever. He jumped on them too, and
Mm.
that was the beginning, really, of the alternative media in this country. And
When was
everything
that? What's
that,
when roughly when?
that would have been I would say probably in the mid 1990s, the early to mid
Okay.
1990s.
Right.
And again, that's when surfing the internet became popular and that kind of thing, and that's
Early
when you
stages, yeah.
yeah, and it was kind of the mainstream media, the prestige media, the newspapers and television stuff. They hated all that. They hated him too.
Mm.
And they were running around kind of like trying to go ahead and plug the holes in the dam. It's
Mm.
kind of like their wall was starting to crumble and the water is starting to pour in, and they're running around like sticking their finger in here and then trying to put a patch in here and stuff. And well, I don't, I think a lot of it now, see, back in those days too, a lot of internet content was free. Now, if you want to go ahead and read a Wall Street Journal or something online, you got to pay for it. But
Mm.
so that was their way, their way of kind of combating this. But you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. And
No.
again, like you're talking about guys like Joe Rogan and people like that, yeah, they're out there and they're not going to be going away. And I think that I know that some of the right wing hasn't liked a lot of that either, but I think the left wing has had more trouble with it than the right wing
I
has.
suppose it's I suppose it's the modern equivalent of the printing press, really, isn't it? It's a game changer.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. It really, that was kind of but all this was going on, when it was all starting and stuff.
mm.
And you had all kinds of people over here they were on the television networks and stuff.
Mm.
And this guy from ABC News was on there saying, well, the big problem now in America is that too many people are wondering what is Rush Limbaugh going to say about this.
Mm.
And I got Limbaugh, the radio guy, and I mean, the mainstream, media on the left, they hated Rush Limbaugh. They hated him passionately,
Mm.
and they kept trying to do well. They followed every one of his programs to see whether they could come up with errors and so forth. And of course there were a few. But they were every time they say, well, this is Rush Limbaugh is just well, back in 1994, okay, Bill Clinton was here in St. Louis, and he was being interviewed on a major radio station here, and he completely blew up. And he said, the big problem in this country is, and he said, and you people here are part of the problem because when I get off of here, he says, you're going to have Rush Limbaugh on for 3 hours talking about everything, and there's no truth detector. and yeah, they brought, and then so Rush Limbaugh, he said, "I am the truth detector." And
Mm.
he's like, America's truth detector, Rush Limbaugh, speaking to you, that kind of thing. And I mean, when Clinton actually, I mean, he just, it was like a tripwire, And
Yeah.
he said, "You're gonna have Rush Limbaugh on here for 3 hours, and there's no truth detector." And he was madder than a wet hen, and
Mm.
his people like Like, you're there in the background, tell quiet, quiet, quiet. Yeah, they didn't want to give
Yeah,
football ammunition, but they did, you know.
I,
So
I suppose it helps to cut across divisions, doesn't it? It helps to reach, these independent media. They help to that they can speak across the political divide. I say against different demographic. It's ties into the demography question issue as well. But yes, just I mean, yeah, that's another say whether you call it a symptom or a factor, but probably a symptom of the factors. One of them being his I've argued bipartisan support, because the mainstream media are always
yeah,
big on talking about all the never Trumpers and the Republicans that didn't like Trump. They're all happy to report that. But what they failed to acknowledge was it was equally true on the other side, and I think far more significant. The old school Democrats that came out for Trump. So people like Tulsi Gabbard, but more crucially, uh, RFK
Kennedy
Jr.
Jr., yeah.
I mean, I'm just going in. I mean, part of it, you look at the figures, and it sort of illustrates why sizable chunks of these demographics all sizably shifted to Trump quite significantly in eating into the Democratic vote. The sorts of people that the Democrats, as you said earlier, uh, were keen to let in because they'd vote for, think they were going to vote for them, like Latinos um, and the Hispanics, who were obviously affected primarily by the security in migration on the southern border and the
Yeah.
security concerns of that. But I mean, looking at the just raw data here. I mean, you've got. I mean, obviously, amongst. I mean, the biggest increase for Trump was among from. I just got it here. Yeah, Hispanics and Latino Americans. So the increase amongst Hispanics and Latinos was 13%. Since 2020. So from 32 to 45% of registered Hispanic and Latino voters switched to Republicans. There were increases among all demographics. That was the biggest, because they were the smallest, probably smaller to begin with. So it was the biggest uh, journey, I suppose, to make. But all other demographics, I mean, they increase. You got increases of even among Black Americans from 41 to 53%. Black men by 1%, Hispanic and Latino women by 7%. It was amongst Hispanic and Latino men by 18%. So that was the biggest. 36 to 54%. So you're taking into majority territory. But one crucial one, the sort of grouping that I don't think anyone expected to come out for Trump on any sizable scale was young people. So you had 18 to 29-year-olds increase vote share from 36 to 42%. And then you look at what a lot of that is helped, I think, by RFK Jr., because a sizable proportion of his voter support base was young people. Because it shows him. I'm trying to. I think I've got the figure there for that. But I mean, first of all, he was consistently polling around 10%, which is some have pointed out as a significant for a third party candidate to be influential. They had to be polling around 10% or more, and he was.
Yeah.
But
That way
even
you can change things, right?
yes, you can be a kingmaker. But going, yeah, I mean, he was even. I think I saw one estimate, one poll. I think it was back in July last year. He was polling about 15% briefly. But
Yeah, I think we got there right around like 13, between 13 and 15% in some of the
yeah.
polls,
Oh, here
but
we
never
go.
over.
I've got it. Yeah, 18% of Kennedy's support was from young people, 1829. So that obviously helps as well. So it's all connected. It's all sort of interlinked. But again, even among women voters, white women, although as I explain in my article, the only thing that Harris was strong on was abortion rights. Um, but even among that, it was not the priority of even many women voters. It was the economy. But it was not enough by itself to turn an election. Um, but it's yes, it's undeniable. But even as I say, even when Biden won in 2020, Trump still increased his vote share by about a few naught points of the percentage
Yeah.
point. Um, but uh, but yes, I mean, do you have any other figures on that, or is it, and you can add to that as well that you've observed, or
Well, all like again, the numbers that you give are all pretty well self-explanatory. But the
mm,
interesting thing is that I don't know exactly. I haven't got the numbers in front of me here, but
mm,
yeah, for black men, Trump got like I think 21% of the black male vote, and black men, usually voted 90% for the Democrats. So when
mm,
Trump actually doubled his support among black men, and even the ones who did not vote for him did not seem to really hate or fear him the way many black men really did hate and or fear many Republican candidates over the
no,
years. And that I could see that was, well, I don't want to say that I could see what nobody else could see, but I could see, in certain instances, some of the Reaganite idea about, kind of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps and that kind of thing, and don't look to the government to take care of you and that kind of thing.
mm,
There have been, black officials who actually have been for quite a while now. They have been echoing that, they are not saying that, well, I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody I know to vote Republican or anything, but
mm,
they are kind of saying that, well, this old thing where we would expect, a very, very broad social safety net and, that would take care of everybody. They're not moving away from that as much as they're saying, hey, that old thing where we expected somebody to basically take care of us from cradle to grave. That's over with now.
mm,
And, we've got to become, well, we got to become productive members of society. And we have to, kind of wait. Well, we got to pull our own, weight. And talking about like an economy that offered opportunity, and that that there are opportunities in America if you simply take them. There's a lot of that's starting. It's a message now that I think is starting to resonate,
mm,
and sometimes it's kind of comical in some ways, but a lot of the black athletes and stuff, these guys who are, I mean, rich beyond belief. And there's a fellow, Charles Barkley, who was a big basketball star back in well, he does TV stuff now. But when he when he was drafted by the NBA and he signed a big contract, and he told all of his friends that he was voting for Ronald Reagan. That was back in 1984.
mm,
And he said, my friends said to me, man, what are you doing voting for Reagan? He's only, he's the president of the rich. And Bartley said, hey, you're forgetting one thing. I am rich. In other words, if Reagan is for the rich guys, he said, hey, I'm one of the rich guys,
mm,
so. And that's kind of, that was a humorous thing, but there are a lot of, kind of black football players, black, baseball players, basketball players and stuff who kind of echo that. They're
mm,
saying, well, we are in like an intensely competitive industry, and we're the best. And
mm,
we should basically kind of encourage everybody else to be as good as you can be at anything you can be, and
mm,
stop playing, the babe in the woods routine or whatever.
mm.
Basically grow up and take your place in the world, and take the opportunities that are out there. And that's a good message. At least I think it is. And you're
Isn't there,
starting to see that happening more now.
isn't there quite a because Trump gave a talk, didn't he? He gave a speech at something called the Black Conservative Movement or something. I'm not familiar with what it much. I don't know much about it. But is there an established uh, campaign
I
organization?
I don't know if there's an established organization, and it was what that may have been was probably, there are kind of organizations of black conservatives, and he
Mm,
may have called all of them, together in like a big conference or whatever, but I'd have to check on that. But
mm,
yeah, again, you're starting to see like a lot of, like black owners, small businesses and stuff, they complain just like the white guys and everybody else, that there are far too many regulations and rules and
mm,
bureaucratic tangles, and it makes it almost impossible to, well, not to succeed, because if you can get a start and you can stay in business for 5 years, and you got a pretty good chance of making a go of it. But
mm,
they're saying that government is, and with best of intentions, I'm not saying that this is all kind of an evil conspiracy or whatever, but you have to get this permit, you got to get that permit, and then you
mm,
have to go ahead and give an environmental impact statement and things like that. And so many hoops that you have to jump through before you can actually get a business started. And there's plenty of people who they have ideas for businesses, which may or may not kind of pay
mm,
off, but they can't even really get started with it, because it's like, okay, well, where do you begin? You talk to somebody at your city hall, and they'll say, okay, well, there's like a checklist of 20 things that you have to do before we can even consider your permit, your conditional use permit, that kind of thing. And a lot of people of both races are saying, well, this is ridiculous. I want to go ahead and start selling, you know, whatever it is that I want to start selling. Why do I have to do all of this? And they're told, well, you don't, we can't, tell you why you have to do it, but you do.
mm.
And people are like, like, oh, you're right. So the
Yeah.
classic bureaucracy here. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing, and nobody knows why you have to do these things, but you do. And don't
Mm,
even think about trying to get going without doing them. So, and that again, that cuts across racial lines, and
mm,
particularly guys who might, well, there's a place not too terribly far from where I am, actually, and where I live here. This is quite close to Ferguson, Missouri, which was the center of all the trouble about 10 years ago in Ferguson. But over in Ferguson, you do have this is a black woman who was well known in her area there for making pies, and people love them.
mm,
And she was able, well, she was going to try to go ahead and open a like store, and she ran into all of the same kind of bureaucratic, foolishness. And one of the TV stations here did a story about, all the troubles that she was having. And, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people simply said, well, this is idiotic. And they brought pressure to bear on the Ferguson city government, and they simply said, "All right, well, we're going to we'll make an exception in this case, and we will let her open her store next week, and we'll take care of the rest of the stuff." And this has been a big, big thing. I mean, she's done. Man, she's not a millionaire, but she's done real well with this. And she is kind of one of the people now who does say that, if it had not been for the pressure that that they brought to bear on the city government. She said, I never would have gotten, my stand open. And she said, how many other people out there are like me? They had an idea, they wanted to do something with it, and they found that they were completely suffocated. They were just, squelched by government and by bureaucracy, and this is the kind of thing that we need to, now she doesn't say that she has any answer to the problem, but she said, yeah, there is a problem here.
Well, that's one
And
of
how much
we go on.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
no, I was just saying that's
Well,
what you finished the point. Sorry, you was about to say something.
well, that basically was the point that there's so much. There are innovators out there, and there are all
Mm,
kinds of people with ideas that they
yeah.
can't even get off the ground, because of the institutional kind of pressures against it.
Well, that's one of the things that motivated Elon Musk. Now he's being obviously heading up. Um, what's it called? The improving government efficiencies. He's
Yeah.
the him and
This,
Ramaswamy. I forgot the name of the department now, but uh, it's along those lines anyway. It's in streamlining government. But I've just remembered got here that yeah he's going back to what you were saying about all you were saying about reach of independent media. I mean, you got to look at Elon Musk really now. I think because that's another pretty much major factor, given that his his following on X is 200 million. Um, uh, and that's 2/3 of the population of America. I mean, we don't know if that's all based in the US, but a substantial proportion of it will be. Um, setting aside, even before we get to the wealth that we're talking about here. So the man's worth estimated to be worth $330 billion. So as I was saying, that's like having a small country backing you, really. He spent an estimated $130 million on the Trump campaign. Um, Going back to what we said before about, I was just asking you before about there's no regulations or restriction limits on campaign financing in the states, which allows this obviously. But but I'm quite in terms of his motivations though. I'm generally sympathetic because I don't get the impression when you got this sort of amount of money that he's got, I don't think short term quarterly gain is is your driving what gets you out of bed every in the morning anymore. I don't think that's what's making him support Trump. I don't think it's easy to say, oh, it's the Trump tax cuts and the tariffs on Chinese electric cars, but I just don't think that's what drives him anymore. I think he's more into the sort of long term esoteric uh, challenges of humanity, like ensuring that we survive as a multi-planet species,
yeah.
warning about the dangers of artificial intelligence. That's his track record, and I think his heart's in the right place. I don't think he's I don't get the sense that there's a sinister um, motive going
Angle
on with him.
or something. Yeah.
Um, but I say I've always liked him actually. I don't um, and also again with his purchase of Twitter, I mean that his concerns about free speech and so on. I think they're all legitimate and very welcome interventions. And he's now actually getting quite close to Nigel Farage here because he's got business interests in Britain as well, and and of course he's from South Africa, so he views Britain as the mother country. So he's quite sentimental about Britain as well. So I think he seems to be wanting to do things to help here as well. So that's quite encouraging. But I don't know if you follow Elon Musk very much, but
Well, I didn't know that he was born in South Africa. That's
hmm,
something that needs to be there. So that I did not know that, and I know
hmm,
it now. So, but yeah,
hmm.
It's impossible not to, kind of follow him if you basically keep up with the news and everything. And he and Trump are now very, very, very good friends. And
Mm,
I don't know. I mean, I know that a lot of the left in America, for some reason, they've hated him for a long time.
mm.
And I could not really understand.
Well, he stepped out of line, hasn't he? Let's face it.
Yeah, well, that's right. He doesn't he doesn't basically take their orders or anything, and he will, he'll call it what it is, So
Right.
if you deviate from, if you're on, if you deviate from the left, they will, jump you,
Mm.
and they will expect that you will, you get your warning, and they expect you'll get back in the line, but he's not a guy that they can
Well,
actually,
he's too big. He's too big and rich to cancel, so they can't do anything about it. So,
right, that, any kind of cancel, or woke thing against him is going to
mm,
go no place
yeah.
because again, he's bigger than they are, and that,
Mm.
so they don't like that. So maybe like a whispering campaign or something, hopefully. And if I were him, I would be very careful about what I do because they're probably hiring private detectives to follow him and
Oh yeah,
everything.
undoubtedly.
Yeah.
But this
Mhm.
ties in really to the culture war and to why the amount of bipartisan support is so present, I think, for Trump, from people like Tulsi Gabbard, Kennedy, and himself, because Elon Musk was not too long ago more or less a liberal. He was I would say, an old school classical liberal, and he still is in
Yeah.
many ways. And that's why so many of these classical liberals have come over to the Republican Party because it extols the traditional liberal values of um, free speech and an open debate, which that they've been denied in so many areas. So that was it all ties in. But really, I think that ironically, the person that seems the most switched on this, on I would say the um, the shortcomings of the modern Democratic Party is Bernie Sanders because he immediately after the election he tweeted and I've got his quote. It said he stated it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has long abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they are right. So he seems pretty switched on, really, with in touch with what's going on. I think on that. So I don't think I can really disagree with that, really. But I don't
Well,
know what. Go on.
yeah, that's interesting because if you consider Democrats as the left wing party in America, which they are, but you've got the top Democrat in the House of Representatives. Well, they're gonna send her packing now because they got another guy in waiting. But Nancy Pelosi, her husband and she are worth over $40 million. She is
Mm,
a what they call a limousine liberal in the sense that her politics are straight down the line, left wing, left wing, left wing.
mm,
But she is, I mean, $40 million, you're rich, and
yeah.
her husband owns a vineyard out in San Francisco. And San Francisco is about the most left wing of all American cities, And that was the thing with Nancy Pelosi. And we were talking, in the classes that I was teaching last fall. And I mentioned that. I said, well, the Democrats' top, person in Congress is a woman worth $40 million. My
Mm,
students were like, and they said, well, the Democrats, I said, well, again, it's a big, big question now whether the Democrats really are the working class party. And if they got back to that, it probably would be electorally good for them. But
mm,
again, you have to, you got Pelosi and, of course, Kamala Harris. Both of her parents were college professors and everything. So she talked about her kind of, again, a classic American success story of working her way up and everything. But, yeah, she was I think her father was an Indian. I mean, in India, from India, and then her mother was a native Black American. But they were both college professors. Her father was a Marxist economics professor and things like
Mm.
that. So it didn't really fit for her to say that I came from humble origins. Again, your
Mm.
father's a tenured professor at Cal Berkeley. You're not necessarily really wanting for anything.
Yeah.
And that's so you get the Democrats, and then of course the Democratic Party constituency, the one that sticks with them probably most of all is the trial lawyers. They're almost all of them are Democrats,
Mm.
and that's they. I don't want to say that every trial attorney is a shyster trying to shake down somebody and get a big score, but a lot of them are.
Mm.
And almost 100% of them are registered Democrats, and so you got wealthy trial attorneys, you got the teachers unions, and that kind of thing. But again, you have many Nancy Pelosi's limousine liberals now, and I think that, I don't know if you would see that, you watch the two party conventions and so forth, and you would see what would seem to be many more kind of middle America normal people at
Mm.
the Republican convention. And I think that's why a lot of the working class guys who seem to be moving in the direction of the Republicans, I kind
Mm.
of think that's a part of it. They're like, well, you see on television, like the Democratic convention, you see all kinds of yeah, LGBT for Joe Biden and that kind of thing. And that does turn a lot of, again, I don't want to say normal versus abnormal, but your
Mm.
ordinary working class American does not identify with that. And for a long time, I think people generally tended to separate their voting preferences from that kind of thing. But when you see that kind of thing becoming more and more prominent, you might look at it and say, well, I don't think that, that party represents my thinking anymore. And I kind
Mm.
of see that's where we're going.
Yeah, we call them. They're called champagne socialists over here. That's the
Okay.
yeah, similar to what you just yeah. We
Yeah,
don't.
limousine,
Yeah,
right.
limousine is more American take on it, but yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, but yeah, that just ties into the final point, the final factor, really. Could you mention Nancy Pelosi? Obviously, I just um, sort of draw on her what the point she made that she believed, oh, if Biden had dropped out sooner, allowed a primary contest, that another candidate would have altered the outcome, and I argue that it wouldn't have done. It may have decreased the loss somewhat, but I don't think it. I don't think it. I think there were so many other factors going the Republicans' way that it wouldn't have fundamentally changed the result of the election. But anyway, let's say the final real factor we haven't really touched on properly is, as I say, Harris's unsuitability as candidate. So I argue in my articles, she was not a politically viable or sufficiently competent candidate to serve, as the nominee. Primarily because the way that she was selected, and she was already proven, as we've said before, she was proven not to have the political acumen or
Yeah, she's not a
uh,
natural
no,
politician.
or strategic instincts to run a campaign. Hence why she ran out of support, and her campaign funding dried up in 2019 before the first state primaries began, and she didn't win a single candidate, and yet Biden still chose her because he was basing his criteria, purely as he's proven with various things he was quoted as saying, that he was determined to select a woman of color, um, in his own words, a black woman, but he it's I argue that it's short-sighted. You're restricting the available talent pool you've got to pull from if you restrict where you're recruiting from any one given demographic, and why it's not necessary, because there are plenty of examples where people of um, you know non-white and women have triumphed on their own merits. And the two examples I think are the most relevant here. One is Barack Obama, and the other is Margaret Thatcher. Both of them didn't need any assistance, and they got where they were on their own merits. Right, whether you support them or not, they were politically successful politicians. So and proved themselves before the electorate. So it was very short-sighted, and I think they in so many ways you can see how they've shot themselves in the foot and ended up where they are. And they can either do one of two things, as is after these results. They can either learn from their mistakes and do better, or they can just blame uh, racism and sexism, misogyny, whatever they like, to excuse their football performance. And I think, unfortunately, history tends to show that it's very difficult for people to not to get sucked into the latter. They tend to it's human nature, I think, just to want to blame external factors than look at yourself. But I don't know what
Well,
your
it's
views on that.
it's very interesting that late in the campaign here, I guess you would say probably getting into like maybe the next last week of October or whatever, and Harris's her shortcomings were becoming, manifest, that
Mm,
she really could not work a crowd. She could not, and she was stumbling all over. And, that's why she basically refused to answer questions because, she needed to be, well, she asked that questions be submitted in advance so that she could actually come up with with a pat response.
mm,
And most of the press said, well, we're not going to do that. And then she said, well, then I'm not going to talk to you. And so
mm,
she was sparring back and forth with them. But, many of the Democrats at that point, they could see that they probably were going to lose. And that again, it would not be a landslide, but it wouldn't be close either. But they would not admit that she, as candidate, that she had major glaring deficiencies until she did lose. And then a lot of these guys, the same guys who were saying, I remember there's a radio program here with a guy who had been the Missouri Republican chairman and a Missouri Democratic chairman. They go after each other a lot. But the Democrat guy, in the later stages of the campaign, the Republican fellow was saying, well, Kamala Harris is just not a very good candidate. And the
mm,
Democrats said, well, I think she's a very good candidate and all this kind of thing. But as soon as it was over with, he admitted that, well, in the basically, no, she wasn't a very good candidate. Now that it's over with, it was like, okay, I will say that now. I could not,
no,
say that on October the 20th, because I would have been then probably physically thrown out of the Democratic, kind of party halls and that kind of thing.
mm,
But he said that, yeah, and he'd be saying that, well, and of course, the whole post mortem on Biden, and this same fellow was talking about everything that he had been saying was he said the stimulus was a great thing. And he was like, well, actually, a lot of the stuff that President Biden championed was bad policy. He said the drunken sailor spending of the stimulus and things like that. And I'm like,
mm,
you're saying that now. Well, why weren't you saying that back in 2021, 2022?
mm,
So I think a lot of time, this is for Republicans too. They will they will just simply go ahead and deny reality if it is politically suitable to do so.
mm,
And that's kind of, I mean, as a Republican, I'm a Republican myself. I do not hide that, but when the party is wrong, and they often are, I do not, I don't cover my ears and close my eyes or whatever. I will say, hey,
Mm,
we pulled this thing and we need to, whatever. But again, like, most of the Democrats, it was kind of a thing where, like they have the one debate that they had. And,
mm,
a lot of people say that they thought that Harris probably had a little bit the better of that, which I think she did, but she never capitalized on that. And, again, as you're getting into October, she seemed to be basically kind of running in place. And again, many of her deficiencies as a candidate were becoming clear at that point.
mm,
Again, she would not answer questions, and when she did try to answer questions, she made a mess of them.
mm,
And again, like saying that at first saying that she would never ever allow fracking, then moving away from it, saying, well, maybe we should allow it. And
mm,
then when she goes, into like she goes to Texas and places like that, and then she's saying, well, I never once said that I would ban fracking when she did say that, And
mm.
so all of these things, and she just wasn't quick enough on the draw.
No.
We like guys who can make like a joke of things and stuff, and she did not have much of a sense of humor
Mm.
about you know and it's kind of like, again, we Americans do like people who don't take themselves too seriously, and she did. I mean,
Mm.
I'm the Democratic candidate, don't you forget that. And we like people who can go ahead and laugh at themselves,
Mm.
guys like Ronald Reagan did.
Mm.
Reagan told jokes about his age
Oh,
and told.
his jokes are brilliant. They are. I think they were
uh,
absolutely incredible. Excellent. They're still funny. Yeah.
Let's you watch it on the like YouTube or whatever,
Mm.
when it was he had a bad performance in the first debate in 1984,
Mm.
and the guy asks him at the second debate, now,
Yeah.
President Kennedy had to go without sleep, and is age, and he says, well, Mr. Truitt, age is not an issue. I will not exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth
Yeah.
and experience. And here's Mondale, all gray haired, Walter
Mm.
himself. And even he
Mm.
laughed,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff, sort of quick witted things like that. And Harris didn't have that, And
No.
again, she tried to script all of her appearances. Again, the whole thing with asking for the questions in advance and stuff like that. And people were saying, well, she probably is not ready, for the kind of level of responsibility that she's trying to step into. She's
Well, no.
talking now about running for.
She hadn't proved it, had she? I mean, she proved not to be up to it when she was assigned, border czar. She
Mhm.
let in 2 million more migrants or something along that number. Uh,
Yeah,
and then
she
she,
had to quit on that.
yeah, and then she flip flopped on. She also flip flopped on private healthcare, hasn't she? Get
Yeah.
supporting and opposing that. But but I mean, fundamentally though, I mean, she was inescapably tied to the legacy and the policies of the Biden administration. She couldn't possibly divorce herself from that. She had too much
Well, yeah,
as well.
that's if you're a vice president, you're running for the presidency.
Mm.
You can't say that I am the candidate of change or whatever
No.
because you're not, and unless you want to go ahead, yeah, and you can't really repudiate
Mm.
anything that your boss did. You might say something like, well, maybe a few things that we should have done differently, which I think she said that,
Mm.
but yeah, it was everything, all the major failures
Mm.
of the Biden administration were kind of just, she could not run away from those things, and she could not, she never said anything about, I don't really recall her at any point in this campaign kind of centering on something, saying that, well, with Trump, you got to make America great again and that kind of thing.
Mm.
I don't think Harris, she never had a slogan. She never had, she
No.
said, I stand for, she's like, put me in there because I I've been keeping the seat warm now for 4 years, and I've waited my term. Waited my time, waited, paid my dues, all that kind of thing.
Mm.
But again, she had not done anything to merit,
No.
the to begin. Like one of the things that we do here. I can't remember really when the last time we elected a sitting U.S. senator president. It's been a long time. A
Mm.
lot of, like here in America now, the training ground for presidents seems to be the governorship of states.
Yeah.
And yeah, the bigger the state is, the better for you because you're shown that you're an administrator, you are a leader, and that kind of thing. And see what Harris is talking about now. She says that she is considering a run for the governorship of California when Gavin Newsom, the guy out there now, Newsom, I think, will be term limited probably in 2 years. And so she's talking about that. And she made some kind of mention, offhand about how, well, when I, get that will answer the question, or that will, something to the point like, well, they're not going to be able to say that I have no administrative experience anymore. So
Mm.
she is quite possibly, yeah, she's looking at running for the governorship of California and probably will only stick around out there for 4 years, assuming that she does fairly well. And then she'll try to get back into the presidency
Mm.
by saying, you all said back in 2024 that I had no executive experience. Well, now I do. But, she is, I think, 60 years old. I think
About that,
Kamala's.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and that's a big difference there between being 60 and being 45. You're 60, you don't have that, you're not over the hill, but you don't have that much time left either. And that's kind of the whole thing now. A lot of my students have been, asking me, well, why is it that so many of our leaders are all, so old? And I'm like, well, age is something that it's a little bit, it's not, it doesn't, it's not quite as much of a disqualifier as it once was, because 65 now is not old.
No.
But I said, yeah, I said, most of the people in politics though, they get into that life, they love that life. And like in Nancy Pelosi's case, I think she's 83 years old.
Yeah.
And yeah, at some point you have to go ahead and say, okay, it's time to step out of the limelight and give it to somebody else. But again, the politicians, I think a lot of them are kind of like, they're kind of like actors and stuff. They don't know when it's time to quit. And
Mm.
Pelosi is a good example of that, and Bernie Sanders too. Bernie, I think, he's 80, I believe, or 81.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of, at some point you have to say, all right, I've done what I can do, and now we got to go ahead and step aside and let the new generation have their shot at it.
Isn't
But
that
a
a
lot
main
of
isn't that a main problem with the Democratic Party? They can't seem to let in new blood. They
well,
seem to be
yeah,
stagnant in that way.
yeah, that is one of the things. Again, you get all these, like, you get, well, then I guess Republicans have the party have the problem too, because Trump will be, when he finishes, if he lives through this term,
Mm.
he will be the oldest person ever to be the president. Biden is right now, but
Mm.
Trump is, I believe, 78.
He was born 46. So
Okay.
yes, he's 78 now. Yeah, he'll be 79 this year. Yeah.
And when he finishes this term, he'll be 82. So, and I
But
think,
he is physically though he's physically much younger than Biden.
oh yeah,
So
Biden,
it makes such a difference on you individually how you age. So I think he'll see out his term. I think.
well, Biden at least, I mean, Trump at least is able to walk up the stairs of an airplane without falling, and he can walk without basically, he's not shuffling, he's actually
Mm.
walking, and
And he
that's
can
a
string
good
a
thing.
sentence together as well. So that's,
Yeah, that's true. He doesn't,
I
have
think
to.
Trump. I'm not saying to the same degree of Reagan, but I think Trump does have that comedic uh, skill.
Yeah.
He is often quite funny. He can be funny.
And I
Um,
think like with
yeah.
Reagan having been an actor, that was
That
perfect.
helped. Yeah.
Yeah, and really, if you're going to be a good president, you better be able to act a little bit. And Harris, I don't think could do that, but yeah, I think Trump is, he's kind of, he's quick on the draw and that kind of thing, and he can make a joke about himself, which again we like that. We don't want guys who take themselves way too
Yeah.
seriously, and that's why like a king in America would never go.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that most people don't know is that we did in 1785. The Congress actually considered making an offer to Prince Henry, Frederick the Great's brother, to come over to be the king of America. And of course,
I
it
didn't
would
know
be
that. No.
yeah, that
Mm.
was openly talked about, and they actually did put out like kind of a sort of like a feeler on that. And Henry said that, well, thank you very much for your consideration. He said, but I don't know your country, I don't know your language, I don't know your customs and so forth.
That's no barrier. Our royal family are descended from Germans, so I don't see
Yeah,
what that's
right.
got to do with anything.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing there too, because like what was going to happen if it would happen? It was that he would have had to agree to congressional supremacy, just like in the Glorious Revolution, William and Mary agreed that they would respect parliamentary supremacy if they
Mm.
became the king. So anyway, yeah, but Henry said that I'm very flattered that you would even consider me for this great honor, but since I know nothing about your country and your
Right.
customs and your language and so forth, I'm going to have to decline. And
Right.
we didn't really make a formal offer. It was just kind of like we put out a like, would you maybe be interested in this? And so we didn't go on the record as saying that we were rejected by Henry of Prussia, but that's pretty much
Right.
what did happen. And after that, the kind of well, the whole idea, the viability of an American king was kind of like, nah, we don't really want to go ahead and go back in that direction again. So
That wouldn't have been an issue in Europe, because our monarchies around Europe just all intermarried. It was all arranged by marriage and politics. So whether
yeah,
you were from the country or not had absolutely no uh, bearing on it at all.
very yeah.
But wasn't just going back to Reagan? Wasn't Reagan and Nixon? Go what you're saying about running again for presidency. Weren't Reagan the only Reagan and Ronald Reagan and Nixon, Richard Nixon, the only they're the only candidates I'm aware of I can think of that successfully re-ran for election and won. Are there any others that you can think of?
Oh, um, well, the first guy, Grover Cleveland,
Mm.
who, Trump is the second American president, as you said, to serve
No, no,
non-consecutive.
no. I don't mean having won it and then win it again. I mean going the first time and failing to win at all, and then coming back. Yes, absolutely. Trump is the second version of that, but
Well,
hmm,
actually, you know, no, because like, American politics is generally like you got one shot,
yeah,
and if you can't close the deal, then you're old news. Now, way back in the late 19th, early 20th century, the Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan three times out of four. They nominated him in 1896, 1900, and 1908. He lost all three.
mm,
And actually, the only time he really was close was in 1896, and that wasn't that close. But that was kind of like, and I think the lesson that they learned from that was like, we'll put somebody up there, and if he doesn't do it the first time, we're probably not going to do it a second time.
mm,
There was, the Democrats did have Adlai Stevenson in 1952 and 1956. But Stevenson had the bad luck of running against Eisenhower, who was, the war hero and
war
that kind
hero,
of
yeah.
thing. Yeah, and Ike won easily in 1952, and I think that the Democrats realized they're going to put Stevenson up again in 56, but they never really expected or hoped that they were going to win, you know. And then
Mm,
you get into 1960, and that's when Nixon ran against Kennedy,
mm,
and there's still a lot of funny business that went on with that one, you know. Joe Kennedy Sr., John's father, he was on the telephone on the Sunday night before the election with the mayor of Chicago, Daley, and said, "What's it look like in Illinois?" And Daley supposedly told Joe Kennedy, he said, "Don't worry about it. We've got it all arranged. No matter
mm,
how many Republican votes come in from downstate, we got the counting and stuff already, and we will, if necessary, we'll create enough votes to make sure that we win Illinois, you know." And that's what happened. I mean, it was razor thin, but the Democrats won Illinois. Also, Lyndon Johnson, who basically ruled Texas politics with an iron hand, you know. There
mm,
were reports they were actually having bonfires of Republican ballots and stuff down there. So whether, and see, Nixon was told by some people, his own people, that you really need to challenge this election. And Nixon said, "No, I'm not doing that. That will not be good for the country to go ahead and to challenge the validity of an election." So
mm,
he simply, and he agreed that he thought he had been basically shafted, you know,
mm,
but that he said the country's good is much more important than Richard Nixon's good, you know. And then Nixon lost in 1962. He ran for governor of California and he lost that one too.
mm.
And yeah, that's what he said to the media that day or that night. He said, "All right, that's it for me. I am out, and you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore." That's what he said to the press, you know.
Mm.
And then, then he left California. He moved up to New York, and he was working as an attorney up there. And I don't know, this fellow named William F. Buckley. I guess you guys are over in Europe
Yeah, I
probably
know.
don't.
But yeah, he did firing line, didn't he?
Yeah, Buckley firing line. Yeah,
Yeah, they're on.
Buckley.
They're all on YouTube. They're brilliant. I find them fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is really, I mean, to watch. So I mean, I remember
Mm,
watching Fireline when it was on originally.
mm,
Show my age there, but Buckley said that he was walking along Fifth Avenue in New York, and in front of him was Nixon and a man he didn't know. And he said, and he was simply eavesdropping on their conversation. And Nixon said to this fellow who, he was walking with, he said, this New York. This
mm.
is where the action is, and this is where I belong. This is where everything happens. This is where I should be. And he said it's a whole lot better than being with all those hillbillies in California. Hillbilly is a low class, kind of a country type.
Do they have
And
their
he goes,
own? Don't they have a strange dialect? They
well,
speak.
yeah, they have a twang and a
They're difficult to understand, aren't they? If you're not familiar with the with that
yeah,
way of speaking.
right. And that's when you
Mm.
call somebody a hillbilly, that's not a compliment. So here is
Okay.
Nixon saying about the former people that he represented in the Senate, all those hillbillies out in California. That's
Right.
what he thought of them, you know. But then, well, he won in 1968, and 68 was that was a particularly odd year because that was when all the anti-war protests are boiling over. That was when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were both assassinated, and
Mm.
America did seem at that point to be kind of teetering really on the brink of, if not anarchy, there was a lot. I was a kid then, and I remember that my mom and dad voted for Nixon, and Hubert Humphrey, who had been Johnson's vice president, was running, and he had the same kind of problem that Harris had this year. He could not completely break with his boss, the
Mm.
president. So he was tied to a lot of that stuff. But, Humphrey was the liberals' liberal. I mean, they all loved him. But this time, that election, they all hated him. They said,
Mm.
well, Humphrey's just another discredited 1940s guy, and what does he mean today, and and they heckled him at his rallies and that kind of thing. But what ended up happening is that in the last couple of weeks of the election, a lot of the new left, as they called themselves, that was like the Black Panthers and all those people, and they looked at what they had. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to vote for Nixon. We're not going to vote for George Wallace, the independent candidate. Wallace was a Southern segregationist, and that
Mm.
was the thing. And they said, well, we're not voting for him. We're not voting for Nixon. So I guess we're going to have to vote for Humphrey. And suddenly, what had appeared to be probably going to be kind of like, the election we just had was going to be a pretty clear win for Nixon, turned out to be desperately close, at least as
Mm.
far as the popular vote was concerned. Nixon ended up winning a fairly comfortable electoral majority, but as far as the popular numbers and stuff, I mean, it was really, really
Mm.
close. I remember my mom and dad, my dad particularly hated Hugh Humphrey, but they were real worried that in that last week they were very worried that Humphrey was going to win. And again, that was, well, I mean, I went to bed when I was a kid. I went to bed on Tuesday night. I got up on Wednesday morning, and my dad said, well, Nixon won. And my mom and dad they didn't like Nixon. They were Reaganites. He was their guy.
Mm.
But they said, well, Nixon is like the lesser of two evils. He probably won't be great, but he won't be as bad as Humphrey would be. But that was, I guess it would be Nixon and Reagan would be the
Mm.
only guys who actually did kind of that they stayed there and they
Mm.
stayed viable, and then they ended up winning the presidency. And again, Reagan won easily both times there.
Mm.
And I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but Jimmy Carter never really got over the fact that Reagan beat him.
No.
Yeah, he was that wounded him deeply, and it kept him. I mean, he continued with that. Although I will give Carter credit on when Reagan's funeral back in 2004, and yeah, heck, you can see that on you can go ahead and check that on YouTube, because I remember seeing Prince Charles was there, and I think Margaret Thatcher was there, and Gorbachev
Mm.
was there, all
Yeah, they're
kinds
all
of.
there. Mm.
Yeah, they were all there. And Carter was giving a eulogy, and he said Ronald Reagan, was a great, man and all this kind of thing. And he said, a man of very, very underrated political skills. And he said, I certainly know that. In other words, yeah, because
Yeah.
he chewed him up and spat him out there.
Mm.
And yeah, Carter was deeply wounded by that. And I think that, I think that a lot of what he was doing in the post-presidential years and stuff, I think he was trying to maybe sort of resuscitate his reputation, because when he left, yeah, I don't know how you all thought about that over there, but here Carter was completely considered to be pretty much a laughing stock,
Mm.
and except for the Democratic partisans who would tell you that he was the hardest working president. Well, maybe he was a hard working president, but he nearly blew the country up in the 4 years that he was there. And again, I even going into the election, I think he thought that he was going to win. And I remember I was watching it on television, and by 7 o'clock at night, they were already calling it for Reagan,
Mm.
and Carter conceded, I think about 7:30, because everything, I mean, everything was just going, Reagan's way. And Carter and Reagan, well, Carter claimed that, he would not debate anybody that year because everything was too important, the hostage crisis and all this kind of thing,
Mm.
And he did agree to one debate with Reagan. And, he was thinking, Carter thought anyway, that his mastery of facts and figures and everything, and that he would be able to run circles around again the old actor.
Mm.
And if you watch that, you can probably find that somewhere on the internet.
Oh yeah,
But
most of the debates are available if you want to watch
yeah,
them. Mm.
yeah,
But
Reagan was 6 feet 2 inches tall. He
yeah.
looked at the president. Carter was, 5 feet 9.
Mm.
Carter was underweight too. He had the strain. He was telling on him. He looked terrible. Reagan looked good. Reagan sounded good. Carter was basically, kind of a hissing at him, almost like, and that was like, Carter was talking about how, well, when you get in there, you're going to be cutting veterans benefits, and you're going to be doing, and Reagan said, that there you go again, like
Mm.
he was talking to a misbehaving child or something. And that was not a rehearsed thing. That was like, he's
Mm.
like, there you go again, and everybody laughed about that, and I think Carter kind of realized at that moment he'd lost the debate. And that was the Tuesday before the election. It was a week before the election,
Right.
and that was when all of the because like that was another one where the polls said it was going to be razor thin, but everything just basically it was like a house of cards coming down, and Reagan won like and super just so easily
Yeah, as
that
I say, I've got the figures on it. It was
uh,
absolutely gargantuan. It was like a gargantuan landslide. It was where is it? 1980. Yeah, 489 electoral
yeah.
college votes. Yeah.
Right. I
Um.
think Carter won six
Mm.
states. He won
Mm.
Georgia. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was even like a razor thin thing in his own state. But Georgia, Minnesota,
Mm.
I think I think he won New York and
Right.
Massachusetts. I think he got six states. So it was a thorough across the country, old fashioned kind of a wipeout there. And again, like heck, the New York Times on the morning of the election, they projected Carter to win. I mean, I don't know where on earth they were getting those numbers because everybody else, even Carter's own pollster told him that afternoon it doesn't look good.
No.
He said that all of we crunched the numbers, we have done everything we can, with interpretation, but it looks like we're going to lose. But the New York Times said that Carter was going to win, and they had egg on their face, and of course, they never they never said, well, we blew it or whatever. They just kind of ignored that and they went on. And that's kind of, if you're in the
Mm.
media, you never have to apologize for getting anything completely wrong, which a lot of times they do.
But didn't you mentioned obviously about the 1960 election earlier? I mean, wasn't one of the major well, I argue one turning point in that election was because it was quite a close election, from what as you I think as you say, it wasn't the issue. One of the issues on that during the debate, those who listened on the radio thought Nixon had won, and on television Kennedy won.
Yeah.
That was by one of the reasons that the television coming in uh, shook things up somewhat. And then, but in going
Yeah.
back to, obviously, you say it was a close election in '68, but of course he won. He won by a landslide in '72, didn't he?
Yeah.
When he got
George
re-elected.
McGovern. You're right. George McGovern was, not McGovern had lived. He'd been a college professor, and then he went directly into politics.
Mm.
And he, had not, I don't think that McGovern had actually ever had a job in the private sector. And
No.
after yeah, and he was not ready for the presidency. And after in the 1980 Reagan landslide, that was not only the presidential thing, but I think it was 8 Democratic senators, McGovern among the rest, were beaten.
Mm,
And McGovern was out of politics then. He opened up a hotel, in Vermont. I think it was in Vermont. And he said, I really wish that I had done this before I ran for public office. He says, because now I understand the problems of a small businessman. First of all, you got to go and pay your loan every month, and you got to pay your staff, and you got to, and he said, now I understand what, a small businessman is going through. He said, I had no collecting, no idea of the amount of work involved and everything.
mm,
And he said, I would recommend that everyone who wants to be president should actually try to run a business so you can see, that the business of America is business, as Coolidge once said. Well, you need to see how it really operates. And then he said, I really wish I had done this way back in 1960 before I ran for the Senate.
mm,
Yeah, so McGovern got 2 states. He won his own state of South Dakota, and he won Massachusetts.
mm,
And he was really, really kind of mopped up, pretty badly there. But Nixon's undoing was already, with Watergate and everything. They
mm.
were already they knew about that. They were going to hold hearings on that in early 1973, and Nixon didn't know that the clock was ticking, but it was.
Mm.
And so that was,
That
and
all,
that
I mean, it all shows parallels, really, what's happened since what's happened now. I mean, it's as I say, I mean, in my view, Carter really won on the back of the Republicans' collapse over Watergate and the fact that he was up against Gerald Ford, who wasn't exactly the most charismatic man on earth either. All
yeah,
that had probably helped him.
Gerald Ford meant well, but he could say good morning, and you could barely keep your eyes open.
No,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
Well, I
yeah,
think we've had a great discussion. I think we've covered all the major points really.
yeah.
It's been great doing this again with you, and there's nothing else. We'll leave it there, I think.
Okay, I think that's it.
Hmm.
The inauguration will be on the 20th of January, so
Yep.
it's another 15 days or whatever. Maybe we can do this then, and we'll get an idea what where Trump intends to go and stuff. So it should be an interesting thing.
I think one of the benefits to Trump winning a second non-consecutive term is that he's had 4 years to reflect
Hmm.
and learn from his experience the first time. So, but in theory, he can perhaps make improvements in
Well,
certain
the
areas, as you
last
said, on,
time,
on selecting people and so on.
yeah, the last time, I don't think really, and I've said this before, I don't think
No,
Trump last time thought he was going to win.
right.
And it was kind of like this was going to be the capper on his career to run for president. There would be a book there and stuff. And then he won. And it's like, wow, now I have to go ahead and govern. And I'm not ready to do that. So I think he understands now the importance of hitting the ground running and making sure that he's got his people in there, making sure that he, gets, I mean, really moves at warp speed.
I don't know.
Because
Okay. I see your point. I don't. I think I take a different view on that. I think he does. I don't think you go through all that unless you want to be president. But there's all the aggravation and the attacks he puts himself through. I don't think you go through all that unless you're serious about wanting the job.
well, yeah, and
But,
he knew too that Hillary had serious weaknesses as a
mm,
candidate.
he timed it well. Yeah.
He was the right man at the right point there.
Mm,
And again, this whole kind of idea that the public loved Hillary Clinton. I don't
no.
think the public loved
I do
Hillary Clinton
think
at
I
all.
do think though that Hillary Clinton was better positioned to win than Kamala Harris. Um,
Well, yeah, and well, but I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who back when Bill Clinton was president, Hillary was actually running for president right then, That's the reason that she ran for the Senate up in New York and she won that seat.
Mm,
And the Clintons did not really do much campaigning for Al Gore. I don't think they wanted him to win. They
right.
figured that he would lose and then that she would be positioned immediately to run and win in 2004. And then, of course, 9/11 changed everything. And then, Obama, who she considered to be an upstart who had never paid his dues, but he came along and, took it right out of her hands.
Mm,
And she's looking at 2016. It's like, okay, finally, it's just like, I have been waiting now for 16 years, and this is my big chance. And I heard it's when the results came in, I heard she basically flew into a rage. She smashed a mirror. She did
well,
all kind of childish stuff, really. But I guess
well, they primarily blame James Comey, don't they, for
yeah, they say that
because it
Comey was the guy
yeah
who,
because had he
caused
not
her.
it there I mean Bill Clinton he still argues that it was possible there's some merit that they're because it was so close it was quite tight compared to this one that had were it not for James Comey there may have been a slim a tight may have been a narrow electoral college win.
Yeah, I don't. You
I'm
get
not
me
I
going
don't think so though, but
because
that's the argument they
and
make.
it was so close, but I
Mm,
don't really see any of the state votes changing
mm,
had Comey not released his,
mm,
finding and that there, and not he had he not decided to reopen the investigation, or whatever.
mm,
That's the kind of stuff that political junkies, people like us,
yeah.
basically would. We noticed that we knew about that and stuff, but I think your average American, probably didn't really know much about that.
Mm,
And even if they did, they were like, well, this is not gonna change my vote. I'm voting for Hillary and I'm not gonna change my vote on this, or I'm
mm,
voting for Trump. I'm not gonna change my vote either.
no.
So that may have led to some, you might say a few thousand votes here or there, or whatever, but I'm not sure that any of the states, the battleground states, where he won all of them, one right after another on
Mm,
election night. I don't think that really would have changed that much,
no.
but Okay, well
Yeah,
then let's leave it here and let's do this again soon.
indeed. Great to talk to you
Okay.
again. Take
Yeah.
care.
Take care. We'll talk to you later on. Happy New Year.
And you. Bye bye.